The desert keeps its secrets well. Out here, silence has weight. It settles in the canyons, clings to the air, and hides things the wind can't quite carry away. It was that kind of silence that hung over the outskirts of Fallon, Nevada, on the night of August 22, 2004. When 19-year-old Danielle Harper vanished, she was last seen just after midnight, driving her dusty red Jeep Wrangler down Highway 50, a stretch of road locals called the loneliest highway in America. The gas gauge was half full, the windows rolled down, the night dry and warm. She'd just finished her late shift at the diner where she worked part-time, waving goodbye to her friend and promising to call when she got home. She never did. By morning, her parents, Mark and Lillian Harper, knew something was wrong. Danielle always checked in, always. She lived at home while attending community college in Fallon, majoring in environmental studies. She loved the outdoors, camping, hiking, photographing desert sunsets. But she wasn't reckless. She didn't just disappear. At 9:15 a.m., her father drove the route she would have taken home. 10 miles east of town, he spotted something, a set of tire marks veering sharply off the road. He pulled over, heart pounding, and followed the tracks down a short embankment. There, in the morning light, he saw her Jeep. Doors open, one headlight still faintly glowing. Danielle was gone. Sheriff's deputies swarmed the scene within the hour. Her cell phone was found in the passenger seat, her wallet still inside her purse. The keys dangled from the ignition. There were signs of a struggle, scuff marks in the dirt, a broken bracelet, and drag impressions leading away from the car into the desert brush. It was immediately treated as an abduction. Search teams spread out across the sand flats, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as helicopters circled overhead. For days, hundreds of volunteers combed the desert, flyers with Danielle's smiling face, long brown hair, green eyes, and that signature dimple covered gas stations, telephone poles, and diner windows from Fallon to Fernley. Her mother refused to leave the command post set up at the fire station. "She's out there somewhere," she kept saying. "She's waiting for us to find her," but the desert offered nothing back. 2 weeks later, a hiker found what searchers had missed, a piece of torn fabric caught on a barbed wire fence 20 miles east, near an abandoned ranch. Deputies found human remains nearby, partially buried beneath a layer of sand. The coroner confirmed what everyone feared. It was Danielle. The investigation became one of the most extensive in Churchill County's history. Detectives collected tire impressions, shoe prints, and DNA samples. They interviewed dozens of people, from co-workers to old acquaintances. Nothing fit. No suspect stood out. Danielle's last known location was the diner. Surveillance footage from the parking lot showed her walking to her Jeep around 11:45 p.m. In the background, faint headlights appeared, another vehicle pulling out minutes after she did. But the footage was too grainy to identify the make or license plate. Detective Carl Jensen, who led the case, worked it tirelessly for months. He and his team followed every lead. A transient spotted near the highway, a suspicious vehicle report, a man claiming to have seen a woman matching Danielle's description near a rest stop. None of it led anywhere. By early 2005, with no new evidence and no eyewitnesses, the case went cold. For years, Danielle's parents refused to stop searching. They held vigils every August, lighting candles along the edge of Highway 50 where her Jeep was found. Lillian kept her daughter's room exactly as it was. Posters still on the wall, notebooks stacked on the desk, her favorite jacket hanging on the chair. The sheriff's office revisited the case several times, but without fresh evidence there was little they could do. Jensen retired in 2012, the file still sitting on his desk when he packed his things. "It's the one that never left me," he said later. Then in March 2023, 19 years after Danielle's disappearance, the phone rang at the Churchill County Sheriff's Office. The call came from a prison in Oregon. The man on the line identified himself as Raymond Cole. A 56-year-old inmate serving a sentence for an unrelated assault. He said he had something to confess. The officer on duty at first assumed it was a prank or another attempt at attention. But when Cole gave details about Danielle's Jeep, the bracelet she was wearing, and the exact location her body was found, information never made public, the tone of the call changed instantly. Cole said he couldn't live with it anymore. He said he'd been haunted by her face for almost 2 decades. Within 48 hours, investigators from Nevada were on a plane to Oregon. Detective Jensen, now 70 and long retired, got the call from his old partner. "Oh, you're not going to believe this," the voice said. "We've got a confession in the Harper case." Jensen didn't hesitate. "Tell me everything." The truth, it turned out, had been sitting just across state lines, waiting for 19 long years to finally surface, and what Raymond Cole revealed would bring both heartbreak and a strange kind of peace to the Harper family, the kind that only comes when the silence finally breaks. The interview room inside Oregon State Penitentiary was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into the bones, that keeps a man honest or breaks him entirely. When detectives from Nevada arrived, Raymond Cole sat waiting, hands cuffed, eyes hollow. He wasn't the kind of man who drew attention. Average height, graying beard, tired face, but there was something about the way he stared at the table, like he was waiting for ghosts to sit down with him. Detective Maria Sandoval led the questioning. She had reopened the Harper file 2 years earlier as part of a cold case initiative, but she never expected it to end here. She pressed the record button and slid a folder across the table. "Raymond," she began softly, "you said you wanted to tell us about Danielle Harper. Start from the beginning." He took a long breath. "I didn't plan it," he said. His voice cracked slightly, rough like sandpaper. "It just happened." He told them he'd been working construction near Fallon in 2004, temporary jobs moving from site to site, living out of his pickup truck. He'd stop at local diners, gas stations, small-town bars. One of those nights he stopped at the diner where Danielle worked. "She was kind," he said. "Didn't treat me like I was invisible. Just smiled, took my order, asked if I wanted more coffee. That kind of thing. It sticks with you when you don't get it often." Detectives exchanged glances. They'd heard this kind of story before, the twisted sentiment that turns admiration into obsession. Cole said he went back a few times over the next month, always late, always sitting at the same counter seat. "She had this way of talking about the desert," he said quietly. "Like it wasn't empty, like it was alive." The night of August 21st, he saw her again. She was closing up, carrying trash to the dumpster behind the diner. He offered to help, but she laughed and said she was fine. He watched her drive away, headlights cutting across the gravel lot. And then something in him snapped. "I followed her," he admitted, "down the highway out past the city lights. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just didn't want her to go." What happened next unfolded in fragments, half memory, half confession. He claimed he pulled up beside her Jeep, flashed his lights. She slowed down, thinking it was someone she knew. He said he waved, motioned that something was wrong with her car. When she pulled over, he got out pretending to help. "She thanked me," he whispered. That's the last thing she said. He described a struggle, her trying to run, his panic, the moment everything spiraled. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he said again and again. But his words couldn't rewrite what came next. He buried her near an abandoned ranch. He covered her body with sand, thinking no one would find it. "I came back once," he said, "a week later, just to make sure. I told myself it was to say sorry. But maybe I just wanted to see if she was still there." Detective Sandoval's hands tightened around her pen. The air in the room felt heavy. She'd heard men confess before, but there was something different about Cole. A quiet resignation. Like he'd already been serving a sentence far longer than the one written on paper. They asked him, how he knew the exact location where her body was found, and he described the landmarks, the broken fence post, the dry creek bed, the rusted water tank. Details that matched the original 2004 crime scene photos almost perfectly. Still, words alone weren't enough. Sandoval needed proof. "If what you're saying is true," she said carefully, "we'll find something that ties you there." Cole nodded. "You will," he said. "I left something behind." That line sent a chill through the room. When detectives returned to Nevada, they reopened the Harper file in full. They combed through every piece of physical evidence collected in 2004, most of it stored in temperature-controlled archives. Among them was a small scrap of fabric found near the body, tested multiple times back then, but inconclusive due to contamination and limited DNA technology. Now, 20 years later, forensic science had changed everything. New DNA extraction methods could recover genetic material from even degraded samples. The fabric, sealed all those years, was sent to a modern forensic lab in California for retesting. Weeks later, the results came in. A full DNA profile was obtained, and it matched Raymond Cole. The match wasn't partial, not uncertain, it was definitive. His genetic profile had been entered into CODIS years earlier, after his 2015 assault conviction in Oregon. But no one had cross-checked it against Nevada's old cold cases until now. It was the confirmation they needed. Detectives flew back to Oregon with a warrant in hand. When they entered the interview room again, Cole didn't resist. He just asked one question. "Will her parents know I told the truth?" "They will," Sandoval said. He lowered his head and exhaled, a quiet, almost broken sound. "Then I can live with that." Back in Nevada, word spread quickly. After 19 years, the case that had haunted Fallon was finally closed. News crews arrived, old photos of Danielle filling television screens once more. Sheriff Tom Riley, who had been a young deputy when it all began, stood before cameras and said, "Justice may come late, but it came." And that's what matters. The Harper family was notified first. When Lillian answered the door and saw Detective Sandoval standing there, she didn't need words. She just whispered, "You found him, didn't you?" Sandoval nodded. For a long moment they stood in silence. Two women from different worlds, connected by the same 19-year ache. Lillian finally said, "She can rest now." And then, for the first time in years, she cried, not out of grief, but release. In a small courtroom in Fallon, Raymond Cole later pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. He declined to make a formal statement, but when asked by the judge if he had anything to say to the Harper family, he looked down and said softly, "I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I just didn't want to die with it still inside me." Mark Harper sat in the front row, holding a photograph of his daughter. "It's not forgiveness," he told reporters afterward. "It's closure. And that's enough." The town of Fallon gathered again that August, just like they had every year since 2004. But this time, the candles flickered not in desperation, but in peace. For nearly 2 decades, the desert had kept its secret. Now the wind could finally carry Danielle's name, not as a mystery, but as a memory. The Nevada desert had always held its secrets well. The scorching sun, jagged rocks, and endless stretches of sand seemed to swallow whispers of tragedy without consequence. For decades, the disappearance of Emily and Jason Harper haunted Reno and its surrounding communities. It had been 15 years since that fateful night in 2004, when the teenage siblings vanished without a trace after leaving their part-time jobs at a local convenience store. Families had searched, police had investigated, and the case had gone cold, leaving only fragments of memories, unanswered questions, and a community unsettled by the unexplained loss. For the Harper family, every anniversary of October 14th carried a ritual of grief. Their parents, Thomas and Michelle Harper, spent years lighting candles in the small chapel behind their home, placing flowers on the makeshift shrine they had constructed. and staring at photographs of their children with silent prayers. Friends, neighbors, and even complete strangers would occasionally check in, offering support, meals, or a sympathetic ear. Yet for the Harpers, the passage of time had created a peculiar kind of loneliness, a quiet isolation born from living in a reality where the world seemed to move forward while the missing remained suspended in limbo. Despite the pain, Thomas Harper refused to surrender to despair. He had spent countless nights poring over police reports, newspaper clippings, and notes scribbled by officers and volunteers alike. Each time new technology emerged, each new DNA or forensic breakthrough, he approached investigators hoping for a glimmer of progress. Michelle, meanwhile, had learned to carry grief alongside everyday life, balancing her work as a nurse with the weight of missing children at home. Both parents had aged visibly under the strain, the lines on their faces deepened by decades of fear, hope, and exhaustion. The breakthrough came unexpectedly in late 2019. Reno's cold case unit, newly staffed with young detectives trained in modern investigative techniques and digital forensics, had begun a systematic review of unsolved cases from the early 2000s. The Harper case, though infamous locally, had long been archived in dusty boxes and file cabinets. Using a combination of advanced DNA testing and genealogical databases, the investigators hoped to explore possibilities that had been impossible to consider when Emily and Jason had disappeared. It was Detective Lena Ortiz, a veteran of the cold case unit with a reputation for meticulousness, who first noticed the overlooked link. A DNA sample collected from a cigarette butt found near the convenience store's parking lot in 2004, thought to be unrelated at the time, had remained in storage. With the new technology, Ortiz realized that the sample could be cross-referenced with public genealogy databases in a way that law enforcement had not yet attempted. Within weeks, a distant relative surfaced, leading investigators to a man who had lived in Reno during the early 2000s, but had since relocated multiple times across the western United States. The suspect, Howard McAllister, had lived quietly, maintaining a job as a building contractor and blending seamlessly into suburban life. To neighbors, he was polite, almost painfully unassuming, always smiling, waving, and participating in neighborhood events. His movements had been meticulously normal, his presence unremarkable until now. When Ortiz and her team began tracing his history, inconsistencies surfaced, work logs that didn't match his claims, travel receipts unaccounted for, and neighbors' memories that painted a picture of someone far more private than initially apparent. It wasn't long before the DNA match confirmed what investigators had feared. The cigarette butt contained genetic material linking McAllister to the Harper siblings. Advanced forensic analysis, including touch DNA and trace evidence, connected him to the crime scene in ways that were irrefutable. The cold case that had eluded justice for 15 years now had a living suspect. The arrest in early 2020 sent shockwaves through Reno. Officers approached McAllister's home before dawn, navigating the quiet cul-de-sac with tactical precision. When he emerged, bewildered and disoriented, handcuffed and surrounded by uniformed officers, neighbors could scarcely believe the unassuming man they had waved to for years was now a murderer. McAllister offered no resistance, his expression calm, almost unnervingly blank. He was taken away without incident, but the ripples of his arrest would be felt for months to come. For the Harper family, the news was both vindication and agony. Relief that a suspect had finally been apprehended collided with the renewed pain of confronting the reality that their children had likely not survived those harrowing first hours and days. Thomas Harper, who had spent years dreaming of a miraculous return, found himself grappling with memories long buried under the weight of hope. Michelle's nightly prayers had changed, from asking for their return to pleading for justice, for the peace that could only come from accountability. As the investigation proceeded, The public learned details that had remained hidden for years. McAllister had meticulously planned the abduction, targeting the siblings after observing their routines over weeks. His fascination with the teens, combined with a documented history of prior offenses that had never led to conviction, painted a chilling portrait of a predator who had lived undetected within the community. Forensic teams reconstructed the sequence of events, relying on both modern technology and decades-old evidence, witness statements, security camera footage from nearby businesses, and the meticulous work of the original detectives who had never abandoned the case. When McAllister's trial began in mid-2020, it was one of the most closely followed criminal proceedings in Reno in decades. The courtroom was packed, not just with family and friends, but with journalists and residents who had followed the case from the very beginning. The prosecution laid out a methodical account of the investigation, from the moment Emily and Jason disappeared to the present-day breakthroughs that had finally secured a suspect. Each piece of evidence was scrutinized, every forensic link explained in detail, emphasizing the decades-long dedication that had brought them to this point. Defense attorneys attempted to argue that the passage of time, McAllister's advanced age, and his otherwise law-abiding life since 2004 were mitigating factors. They contended that imprisonment would be excessive for a man who had lived quietly for years, now facing crimes committed nearly 2 decades prior. The argument fell on deaf ears. For the Harpers, there was no leniency to be granted. This was not simply a matter of punishment, it was the culmination of 15 years of relentless hope, painstaking investigation, and emotional endurance. The jury returned a unanimous guilty verdict on both counts of first-degree murder. Judge Samuel Rivera, addressing McAllister before sentencing, stated, "Justice may have been delayed, but it is no less just. You deprived a family of their children, a community of its sense of security, and time cannot erase the pain you caused." McAllister received consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, a symbolic acknowledgement of the separate lives lost and the profound suffering inflicted. The Harper family, though exhausted, experienced a quiet sense of closure. They were never granted the comfort of seeing Emily and Jason alive, but the knowledge that the man responsible had been held accountable allowed them to begin the slow process of healing. For Thomas, it meant finally dismantling the nightly vigils that had been a fixture of his life since 2004, replacing them with community outreach programs and talks about the importance of vigilance and reporting suspicious behavior. Michelle found solace in counseling other parents affected by violent crimes, using her own experiences to guide and support those navigating the long shadows cast by loss. Community response in Reno was profound. Citizens organized commemorations for Emily and Jason, placing flowers, candles, and photographs at the convenience store where their story had begun. The local historical society established a scholarship in the siblings' names for students pursuing careers in forensic science and criminal justice. Law enforcement agencies credited the Harper case as a model for integrating genealogical DNA analysis into cold case investigations. Training seminars and workshops were developed, sharing the lessons learned with other departments nationwide. Media coverage was extensive. National networks featured the story as an example of how modern technology, when combined with dogged investigative persistence, could solve crimes that had baffled authorities for decades. The story was framed not just as a tale of tragedy, but as a testament to the resilience of families, the importance of perseverance in law enforcement, and the potential of science to deliver justice long delayed. Despite the public attention, the Harper family remained focused on private remembrance. Each year, on the anniversary of their children's disappearance, they gathered with close friends and relatives to honor Emily and Jason quietly, placing a single candle for each child and sharing memories of laughter, school achievements, and family vacations. Over time, the emphasis shifted from sorrow to remembrance, a conscious effort to celebrate the lives that had been stolen, rather than dwell solely on the manner of their loss. Law enforcement. Officials continued to maintain the cold case unit as a permanent entity within the Reno Police Department, using the Harper case as a guiding example. The unit expanded its resources, investing in forensic technology, genealogy databases, and partnerships with academic institutions. Detectives were trained to revisit old files, question overlooked leads, and consider suspects previously dismissed. The success of the Harper case spurred a wave of renewed interest in solving other unsolved cases from the early 2000s, providing hope to families who had long given up. Howard McAllister remained in Nevada State Prison, living the remainder of his life under constant surveillance. He never admitted guilt outside the courtroom, offering no apology to the Harper family. His silence, however, could not erase the painstaking work that had brought him to justice. For Emily and Jason Harper, justice, though delayed, had finally arrived. The story of the Harper siblings serves as a reminder that even when the trail goes cold and decades pass without answers, persistence, technology, and unwavering determination can restore a measure of justice. Families who refuse to let their loved ones be forgotten can inspire communities, law enforcement, and future generations to act, speak up, and search relentlessly for the truth. In Reno, the Harper case has become a symbol of hope, a narrative of closure, and a lesson in the unyielding